In today's turbulent world, you can never have too many friends. And I think that what Australia does need to do is diversify its defence and strategic relationships. And here we have a golden opportunity being provided to us by the European Union and the European Commission to strengthen our defence and strategic relationship with Brussels. I think that's a very good move. I'm not for a minute suggesting we should downgrade our relationship with the United States, but there's nothing stopping us complementing those very important relationships with the United States by strengthening our relationships with Europe, and I think that's what we should be doing.
So what's the substance of the existing defence and strategic relationship between Australia and Europe?
Well, essentially we have bilateral relationships with individual states. We also have what's known as the IP4 agreement with NATO, whereby essentially Australia, New Zealand, Japan and South Korea are observers and participate in NATO meetings. And then we have essentially agreements on specific issues. For example, AUKUS includes not only the US but also the UK. And there are other defence cooperation agreements with Europe. There's one called the Combined Space Operations Initiative, or CSPO, which sees European partners and Australia share information about space activities. So there's a range of agreements that we already have.
And so what form could this greater strategic relationship with Europe involve?
Look, I think probably what it will involve will be enhanced cooperation on defence planning, intelligence sharing. But I think importantly, it also opens up greater opportunities for collaboration in defence capability development and defence industry cooperation. There is a great deal of opportunity for European defence companies to engage with Australia, to allow Australia to consider European options for defence capabilities in the future. One example would be the Global Combat Air Program, which is run by the UK, Japan and Italy, that Australia could invest in as a next generation air combat capability. There are other programs and projects in terms of naval, land, space capabilities that could engage with Australia, and I think that there's real potential here for Australian defence industry and European defence industry to work together to provide an entirely new suite of capabilities that work alongside and with US provided capabilities.
Should Australia be careful about going down this path because it could unsettle the current US administration?
I don't think it will. Look, I think what we're doing is we're diversifying our defence cooperation and we're burden sharing to a greater degree, and I think that is what the Trump administration wants. I think the US is more likely to be unsettled if the current government does not lift defence spending significantly in the short term. The Albanese government is still talking in terms of 2.33% of defence spending on defence spending by 2033. That's simply not sufficient, and it's too late. So I think where the opportunity to work with the Americans and with the Europeans lies is in boosting our defence spending up to 3 or 3.5% of GDP. That enables us to have greater opportunities to invest in both Europe and the United States at the same time.
Donald Trump has been ferocious with his criticism of the US countries, particularly their defence spending levels. Has Australia kind of escaped that so far, and if so, why?
Well, we haven't escaped it. We are going to be forced to confront that sooner rather than later. The current government, the Albanese Labor government, won the election on the basis of a policy that suggested 2.33% of GDP on defence. As I said, that's insufficient, too little, too late. And so what will happen, I think, in coming months is the Trump administration will essentially put pressure on Australia to lift its defence spending to between 3 and 3.5% of GDP, and not do it in 10 years, but do it within 1 to 2 years. And I think Europe has already seen that pressure applied to them. They're now going up to 5% of GDP. Whether we would at some point in the future have to go up to 5, I think, is really not so much up to Trump or indeed Australia. It's up to the strategic environment that we find ourselves in. And that strategic environment is highly threatening. We are in a pre-war period in the Indo-Pacific region, and so Australia needs to start taking that threat seriously. And that means spending more on defence, doing more burden sharing to a greater degree, both with the United States and with Europe.
Do you think the US approach to international relations could settle significantly after the Trump presidency anyway, and Australia should be looking at the longer term?
Look, I am not certain that we're going back to a normal situation after Trump leaves, potentially in 2028. I think that we could see a continuation of the current approach under a different US administration, potentially under a J.D. Vance administration. There's also discussion about potentially Trump trying for a third term. I'm not sure how that's going to work. But I think that we should not count on a return to the status quo ante before the Trump 2.0 administration after 2028. I think that the Democrats are in a mess in the US at the moment, and if they don't get their act together, then I think it's highly likely that in 2028 you'll have either a J.D. Vance presidency or potentially Trump will try for a third term. So we shouldn't assume that things will go back to the status quo ante anytime soon.